Welcome, friends. We're so glad you've chosen to study God's Word with us this day. As we're studying the all-important question, is Jesus of Nazareth the Son of God? In our last lesson, we studied concerning the omniscience of Jesus, the quality that belongs to God, but which quality Jesus manifested. And by omniscience, we mean simply his knowing of all things that was going on. He manifested that as we cited many examples of things that he knew were taking place in the world, of the fact that he knew what men were thinking, what men were doing. But today we're going to turn to another that discusses and seeks to prove the fact that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is what he claimed to be. And that is, we're going to look at his omnipotence, at the miracles that he wrought. When the Apostle Peter preached his sermon on Pentecost in Acts the 2nd chapter, he said, "Ye men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God unto you by mighty wonders, works, and signs, which God did by him in the midst of you, even as ye yourselves know." Here, the mighty works that Peter speaks that Jesus wrought and that God wrought through him was the matter of miracles. Now, a miracle is that is a much overworked word, and it's a word that people frequently use of things that are marvelous, but really are not miracles. For instance, we've heard many times people speak about the miracle of childbirth. Well, childbirth is marvelous. It is something that is wonderful, and to be blessed with a child is one of the greatest blessings that a couple could have. But childbirth is not a miracle. A miracle is something that is contrary to nature, something that is impossible to occur. A miracle, then, that Jesus is said to have wrought was that God did by him in the midst of his nation. Now understand, Jesus wasn't the only person that ever worked miracles. Moses, 1,500 years before, Jesus was a miracle worker, right? And we remember many of the miracles that Moses wrought. We remember the fact that he stretched out his rod over the Red Sea and the sea divided. We remember that he fed the people from a matter of manna that fell from heaven. He gave people to drink from a rock. But Moses wasn't alone in working miracles. Joshua, who finished the job that Moses had begun, he actually carried the people of Israel into the Canaan land. He likewise performed miracles. Moses had worked miracles in dividing the Red Sea. Joshua worked a similar miracle. He caused the River Jordan to stand up in a heap for a long ways up as far as the head of the river was concerned. And not only was that true, but he did something that it is not said that Moses did. He caused the moon and the sun to stand still for about the space of a day, while the people were avenging themselves of their enemies. He wrought other miracles. And we remember the miracle that was wrought through the hands of Joshua in Jericho. Old Testament prophets like Elijah and Elisha also were workers of miracles. And after Jesus had gone back to heaven, his apostles, and then some of the disciples after them likewise worked miracles. But there was a difference between the miracles that were wrought by men and the miracles that were wrought by Jesus Christ. First of all, the miracle that was wrought by men, every one of them was a power that was given to them that was not inherent in them. And not so with Jesus. He was the Son of Man, but he also was the Son of God. And because he was the Son of God, he was one that had the inherent power to work miracles. After all, when he was with God, the Father, in the beginning of our age, the record said all things were made by him. Without him was not anything made that had been made. So it wasn't anything that would be contrary to reason nor to his nature for him to work miracles on earth. But we see that there was a second difference between the miracles that men wrought and the miracles that Jesus wrought. The miracles that men wrought were given by God to them to prove that they were messengers of God, that they were ones that had a revelation that men were to listen to. And while that did hold true as far as Jesus was concerned, the greater purpose of the miracle that he wrought was to show men that he was who he claimed to be, that he was indeed the very Son of God. There was no realm in nature from which Jesus' power was exempt. It did not work. Every realm of nature is that Jesus worked miracles in. Consider some of them. Consider the matter as far as disease and sickness. He worked in these and wrought many marvels and miracles. One of the first miracles he wrought in this area was in healing Peter's mother-in-law of a very high fever, apparently, that she had. And there was, on another occasion, a time in which he was traveling to see the daughter of a ruler of the synagogue, that a woman came up behind him that had an issue of blood for many years, and she, by touching him, was healed. We find other miracles that he wrought. He was not only able to do these, he was able to heal a man at the pool of Bethesda and allow him the matter to be able to walk and to navigate. Miracles that he wrought were he gave sight to those that were blind. He caused the deaf to hear. He caused the dumb ones that were dumb, unable to speak, to be able to speak. He functioned in the realm of disease and the matters of tragedies of individuals either having lost or else never possessed those natural things that men have as nature to them. But Jesus didn't just simply work in the realm of disease. Jesus worked in other realms as well. Jesus had the power over spirits and the spirit world. You'll remember that on many, many different occasions, individuals that were possessed with evil spirits, there would be the plea to the Master to heal them. And those spirits were ones that had to obey the voice of Jesus Christ. And they would frequently cry out, "We know who you are, the Holy One of God." And Jesus would not allow them to speak. Not only were it true that there were ones that had the power, did he have the power over all disease and the matter of infirmities, but he had the power to multiply things. He could change the nature of one thing to something else. For instance, he could change water and make out of that water wine. Remember? One of the first miracles, in fact, the first miracle that he is said to have done was that he turned water to wine at a wedding feast in Cana of Galilee. He was able to multiply things. Remember? He took a little boy's lunch, 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And from that little boy's lunch, when he blessed it and broke it, they were able to feed 5,000 men, beside the women and children. A vast multitude of people, counting them all, 12 or 13 or 15,000 people from one little boy's lunch. Jesus was able to do that. On another occasion, he fed from 7 loaves and a few fish 4,000 men. But not only did Jesus have power over the matter of those things, he had power over nature. Once he was crossing the Sea of Galilee with his disciples, and he went to sleep in the boat. And a storm came up suddenly, and it became very fierce. In fact, the disciples saw the water falling into the boat. They were fearful that it would be that would sink and they would drown. So they came to Jesus, and they said, "Master, don't you care that we perish?" And Jesus arose and rebuked the winds and the waves and said, "Peace, be still." And suddenly there was a great calm. And the disciples said, "What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the waves obey his voice?" Jesus not only had the power over the matter of the elements of our world, he could change things from one little boy's lunch to feed 10 or 12,000 people. He had the power to heal people that were diseased. He had power over the spirit world. But he had power over death itself. Some of the greatest miracles and the ones that touch us with the compassion of Jesus are those in which that Jesus healed and raised alive individuals that were ones that had died. The first miracle of that sort that he healed was he was going to the city of Nain. And as he drew near to that little village, there was a funeral procession that came from that city. They were going to the cemetery. And it was a young man. And his mother was bereaved. She was a widow. And this was the only child or only son she had. Jesus stopped that funeral procession, and he healed that young man, raised him from the dead, gave him back to a wondering but so grateful mother. We remember another occasion in which the ruler of a synagogue, which we've already alluded to, in a city of, I believe, Capernaum, but in that city, this ruler was one that came to Jesus very distraught. He had an only daughter, 12 years old, and that daughter was one that was at the point of death, did everything. And so he, as a last resort, sought out Jesus and said, "Come and heal my daughter." But in the meanwhile, while he was gone, the daughter died. And so Jesus went into the house of the man, and they had on the way sent message to him, "Don't trouble the master anymore. Your daughter's dead." To them, he couldn't do anything else. But Jesus told Jairus, "Don't trouble. Don't worry. It's going to be fine." So went into the house, and he raised the daughter. Don't you know how happy and joyous those parents were to have their only daughter raised from the dead? Jesus was able to do that. On another occasion, a dear family of two sisters and a brother that lived near Jerusalem, Lazarus and Martha and Mary. Jesus received word from the two sisters, Lazarus is dead. And he waited, or Lazarus is sick. And while he waited, then he told his disciples, "We're going to Jerusalem because our friend Lazarus is asleep. He's dead." And so, although the disciples protested, he went. And after meeting both Martha and Mary, he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they carried him to the place where Lazarus lay sleeping. He'd been dead 4 days. And so Jesus said, "Roll away the stone." Martha protested. She said, "He's been dead 4 days. The body smells." And Jesus said, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed that you'd see wondrous things?" And so when they'd rolled that stone away, Jesus said, "Lazarus, come forth." And Lazarus came forth, a marvelous miracle. Perhaps one of the greatest miracles in this nature that was wrought was when Jesus was raised from the dead. He was one that in John, the 2nd chapter, was asked for a sign, and he gave the sign, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up again." While many misunderstood what Jesus meant, thought that he was talking literally, that he would restore and raise up the temple in Jerusalem that had been 46 years in building. He wasn't talking about a physical temple. He was talking about his body. And you know, when he was crucified and put in that tomb and was dead, for 3 days he slept. On that 3rd day, co-joined with the power of his Father, Jesus arose from that grave and came forth. A mighty marvel. Jesus manifested the characteristics of God. He was that was omniscient. He knew what men were thinking. He knew what things were taking place. But not only so, he was that was Lord of power as well. You know, my friends, Peter said he was a man approved of God by mighty works and wonders and signs. Think about it. When we look at the works that Jesus did, they were genuine. If they had not been genuine, my friend, if they'd not been genuine, well, we would never have heard about Jesus Christ of Nazareth. But we have heard about him. And we've heard him because the messages and the miracles that he wrought are those things that would herald. They were indisputable. His enemies couldn't deny it. Remember when he raised Lazarus from the dead? Those that were unbelievers and that would ultimately bring about his death said, "What do we? This man does many signs." We can't deny it. Men that stood by when the blind man was given sight, they knew he had worked a miracle. They just didn't believe that Jesus had wrought it by the power of God. They thought that he was one that was a fake. But my friends, God would not approve of a fake if it was that he was a fake. Jesus was one that is God's Son, and God allowed him to work the miracles that he did. And thus, we look at this sign that we have of Jesus of Nazareth. Is he the Son of God? He manifested the attributes of the omnipotence of God. In our next lesson, we're going to be looking at something else that's very important and significant in proving that Jesus is the Son of God. And those had to do with the prophecies that he fulfilled. And there are many. And that's the lesson we'll discuss next week. We hope you'll choose to study us out a week from today and study with us that lesson concerning Jesus, the one of the fulfiller of prophecies. But now, we thank you for having come, for listened, and we hope and pray that God will bless you and make of this day wonderful things for you. Thank you for your attention today.